I don't know what your father saw in you sometimes, Helen muttered, her voice cutting through the quiet kitchen like a knife. You can't even manage to clean up after yourself. I froze, the coffee cup in my hand hovering mid-air. The dishes in the sink weren't mine. I hadn't even eaten breakfast yet, but I swallowed the retort bubbling in my throat. Confrontation with Helen never ended well. My name is Julia, and I'm 25 years old. 6 months ago, my dad passed away unexpectedly, leaving me as the sole inheritor of everything he worked so hard for. I've been staying with Helen, his wife of 10 years, because, well, it seemed like the right thing to do. My dad adored her, and I wanted to keep some part of him alive. I'm an only child, and with my mom gone since I was 12, I thought we could grieve together. But Helen didn't want a grieving partner. She wanted control. At first, I chalked up her harsh comments to stress. Losing my dad had been hard on both of us. She had welcomed me into her home after the funeral, insisting it was what he would have wanted. But as the weeks turned into months, her true colors began to show. Little remarks about how I dressed, how I spent my time, even the books I read, became an almost daily occurrence. Your dad always thought you wasted too much time daydreaming, she'd say with a smirk. Or, no wonder you don't have a boyfriend. Who would want someone so disorganized? It wasn't just words, though. Small things started happening around the house. My favorite mug suddenly disappeared, only to show up later, shattered in the trash. The thermostat would be turned down to freezing, and Helen would claim she hadn't touched it. But I told myself it wasn't worth making a fuss. Helen had been my dad's wife for a decade. If he had loved her, there had to be good in her somewhere. Right? That morning, as Helen slammed a cabinet closed, muttering something under her breath, I started to wonder if I was wrong. The tension grew heavier as the day wore on. Helen seemed more agitated than usual, pacing the house and snapping at me over trivial things. I overheard her on the phone later, her voice low and clipped. I told you, we'll talk when she's gone, she hissed, before slamming the door to her room. My chest tightened. Was she talking about me? I shook off the thought, telling myself I was imagining things, but the unease lingered, a small voice in the back of my mind whispering that something wasn't right. Growing up, I was always the quiet one. After my mom passed away, my dad and I became a team, just the two of us against the world. He worked long hours to make sure I never went without, and I did my best to make him proud. I threw myself into my studies, stayed out of trouble, and never gave him a reason to worry. When he met Helen, I was 15. She seemed kind at first, always wearing a warm smile and laughing at my dad's jokes. It wasn't easy seeing him with someone new, but I wanted him to be happy. She brought a lightness to his life that he hadn't had since losing my mom, and that was enough for me. But things changed once they got married. Helen moved into our home, and I started noticing her subtle jabs, always cloaked in sweetness. "Oh, Julia, you're so smart, but don't you think you should try harder to make friends?" Or, "Your dad tells me you're very independent, but everyone needs a little polish." I let her comments roll off my back, thinking they didn't matter. Now, sitting in the house that was supposed to be my refuge, her words felt like knives. Everything my dad had worked for, this house, his investments, his business, was left to me after his death. It wasn't because he didn't care for Helen, he just wanted me to have security. He trusted her to be fair, to continue to love me as her own. I wanted to honor that trust, but Helen didn't seem to share the sentiment. Even before I moved in, she made it clear she wasn't happy with the arrangement. "It'll be an adjustment for both of us," she'd said with a tight smile. "But I know it's what your father would have wanted." Living here had been anything but an adjustment. It felt like a constant test. Helen controlled everything, the bills, the meals, even how the furniture was arranged. I offered to help, but my suggestions were always brushed aside. "You wouldn't understand the responsibilities of running a household," she'd say, her tone dripping with condescension. Still, I stayed, hoping things would get better. I told myself Helen was just grieving, that she was trying to cope in her own way. I ignored the late-night phone calls, the sharp remarks, the way she looked at me like I was a guest overstaying my welcome. But now, with my father gone, the family I had left seemed to be slipping further away. I was trying to hold on to the pieces, but it felt like Helen was intent on shattering them. The uneasy feeling from earlier returned. Helen's whispered phone call played in my mind like a broken record. "We'll talk when she's gone." Gone where? It started as a small suspicion, like a splinter lodged in my thoughts. Helen had always been sharp-tongued and controlling, but her recent behavior felt different, more deliberate, more sinister. The cryptic phone call I overheard earlier replayed in my mind as I sat at the dining table, pushing my dinner around my plate. "You're quiet tonight," Helen said, her voice unnervingly cheerful. She watched me closely, a smile that didn't reach her eyes plastered across her face. "Just tired," I mumbled, forcing a weak smile in return. Her gaze lingered for a moment longer before she turned her attention to her glass of wine. "Well, make sure you get plenty of rest. You've looked unwell lately." The comment hit me harder than it should have. She wasn't wrong. I had felt off these past few weeks. Fatigue, nausea, headaches. I had brushed it off as stress, but the timing nagged at me. The first symptoms had started not long after I moved in. That night, unable to shake the gnawing unease, I decided to check Helen's room. She had left for a late-night errand, so I had some time. I didn't like the idea of snooping, but something inside me screamed that I had to know. I started with her desk. Papers were neatly stacked, her handwriting meticulous. Bills, receipts, a few personal letters, nothing out of the ordinary. But then I noticed her laptop, left unlocked. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened her email and immediately felt my stomach drop. One email thread stood out, a conversation with someone named Paul. The subject line read, "Next steps." I clicked it, my hands trembling. "Paul, she's still there? I thought you'd have handled this by now." "Helen, I told you, these things take time. Stop rushing me. It has to be seamless." Paul, "We don't have time for seamless. The clock's ticking. Do what needs to be done." My blood ran cold. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. Who was Paul? What were they planning? I kept scrolling, my breath hitching with every new message. The correspondence grew more explicit. References to the money, the estate, and chillingly, her out of the way. A wave of nausea hit me and I clutched the edge of the desk to steady myself. This wasn't just paranoia anymore. Helen and Paul were plotting against me. I shut the laptop and left her room, my mind racing. Every comment, every strange behavior suddenly clicked into place. Helen didn't just resent me, she wanted me gone. But I wasn't going anywhere. I went back to my room, locking the door behind me. As I stared at the faint glow of my phone, I knew what I had to do. Helen thought she was in control, but she underestimated me. This wasn't just her house. This was my life. And I was going to fight for it. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of clinking dishes downstairs. Helen was already up, humming an off-key tune as she moved around the kitchen. My stomach churned, not from hunger, but from the weight of what I'd uncovered the night before. I couldn't act impulsively. Whatever Helen and Paul were planning, they had already started putting it into motion. If I tipped my hand too soon, I might lose the chance to stop them. I sat on my bed scrolling through my phone. The emails I'd read were etched into my mind, but they weren't enough. I needed tangible proof, something undeniable to take to the authorities. Breakfast was tense. Helen served eggs and toast with her usual forced cheer. "You've got a busy day ahead, don't you?" she asked, watching me intently. I nodded, avoiding her gaze. My appetite was gone, but I forced myself to take a few bites. Helen seemed pleased, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth as she sipped her coffee. After breakfast, I made an excuse to leave the house. "I'm meeting Lila for coffee," I told Helen, grabbing my coat. Her expression faltered for a split second, her grip tightening on her mug. "Of course. Tell her I said hello. The moment I was out of the house, I called Lila. Julia, what's wrong? She asked immediately, sensing the panic in my voice. I need to see you, I said, my voice trembling. It's about Helen. I think she's trying to... I couldn't finish the sentence. The words felt too surreal. Trying to what? Lila pressed. Just meet me at the coffee shop, I said. When I arrived, Lila was already waiting at a corner table, her brow furrowed with concern. I sat down and recounted everything, the emails, Helen's comments, my symptoms. Lila's face darkened as I spoke. This is serious, Julia, she said. You need to go to the police. I will, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I need more proof. If I walk in with just suspicions, they might not take me seriously. Lila nodded. Then we'll get proof, whatever it takes. Her words gave me a sense of reassurance I hadn't felt in weeks. I didn't feel completely alone. We spent the next hour planning. Lila suggested installing a small camera in the kitchen to monitor Helen's movements and recording any conversations we overheard. It felt invasive, but desperate times called for desperate measures. As I walked back home, my nerves were raw, but my resolve was stronger than ever. Helen might have thought she had the upper hand, but she underestimated me. The house felt colder when I returned. Helen was sitting in the living room, pretending to read a magazine, but her eyes flicked up as soon as I walked in. Coffee with Lila was nice? She asked, her voice syrupy sweet. Yes, I said simply, heading toward my room before she could press further. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't let her see even a hint of fear. Once inside, I locked the door and pulled out the tiny camera Lila had given me. Installing it in the kitchen wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. Helen had to slip up eventually, and when she did, I'd be ready. That night, I waited until I was sure Helen was asleep. The house was eerily quiet as I crept downstairs, my footsteps muffled by the rug. In the kitchen, I found a spot behind a row of decorative jars where the camera would be hidden but still have a clear view of the room. The next few days were tense. I went about my usual routine, forcing myself to act as though nothing had changed, while the camera silently recorded everything. Helen's behavior grew increasingly erratic. She snapped at me for minor things, leaving a light on, forgetting to close a cupboard, and her phone calls became more frequent, her voice sharp and hushed. One afternoon, I decided to check the footage. I locked my door, plugged the camera into my laptop, and played the recordings. At first, there was nothing unusual, just Helen making tea or tidying up. But then, on the third night, I saw it. Helen stood at the kitchen counter, carefully pouring a white powder into a small jar labeled sugar. She paused, glancing toward the doorway as if expecting someone to catch her, before putting the jar back in its place. My stomach twisted. It wasn't just suspicion anymore. This was real. I called Lila immediately. I have proof, I whispered, my voice shaking. What did you find? I think she's been tampering with the food. I caught her on camera putting something in the sugar jar. Lila's silence on the other end was heavy. Finally, she said, Julia, you can't stay there. Not another night. Come to my place. I hesitated, glancing at the closed door of my room. I can't just leave. If I disappear, she'll know I'm onto her. Then what's the plan? Lila asked. I took a deep breath, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. I'm going to gather everything I can, emails, recordings, everything, and then I'll go to the police. But I need more time. Be careful, Lila said firmly. Promise me. I will, I said, though the knot in my stomach told me this was far from over. The next morning, I woke up to find Helen in an unusually good mood. She was humming to herself in the kitchen, the same tune I'd heard the day before, and even offered me breakfast with a smile. You've been looking so tired lately, she said, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. I made this just for you. You need your strength. The smell of the food turned my stomach. I glanced at the sugar jar on the counter, then back at the plate. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face neutral. "Thanks," I muttered, forcing a small smile. I pretended to take a bite, carefully shoving the eggs around the plate while Helen watched me from the corner of her eye. As soon as she left the room, I grabbed a plastic bag from the pantry and scraped the eggs into it. Whatever she'd done, I wasn't going to risk it. I tucked the bag into my purse, planning to have it tested later. That afternoon, I reviewed the footage again. This time, I found something even more chilling. Helen was on the phone with Paul, pacing the kitchen as she spoke. "She's still here," Helen hissed, her voice sharp with frustration. "I've done everything I can to make her uncomfortable, but she won't leave." Paul's voice was faint but clear. "Then you need to stop wasting time. The lawyer can't hold off forever, and the longer she's alive, the more complicated this gets." My breath caught. The longer she's alive. It was no longer a question of if Helen was trying to harm me. It was a question of when. I spent the rest of the day gathering every piece of evidence I could. The video footage, the emails, and now the tampered food, all of it pointed to a clear and deliberate plan to get rid of me. That evening, I called Lila again. "I have enough," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm going to the police tomorrow." "Good," she said firmly. "And you're staying with me tonight. No arguments." I agreed, packing a small bag with essentials and the evidence I had collected. I told Helen I was heading to Lila's for a girls' night, masking my unease with casual indifference. She didn't question it, her focus seemingly elsewhere. But as I left the house, her parting words sent a shiver down my spine. "Enjoy your night, Julia," she said, her tone light but her eyes cold. "You never know when it might be your last." That night at Lila's felt like the first breath of fresh air in weeks. Her cozy apartment, filled with the smell of lavender and the sound of soft music, was a stark contrast to Helen's tense, cold house. "You're safe here," Lila said as she handed me a cup of tea. "We'll get through this." I nodded, clutching the mug like it was a lifeline. "I hope the police take me seriously," I said. "What if they think I'm being paranoid?" "You're not," Lila said firmly. "You've done everything right. You have evidence, more than enough to make them act." The next morning, we went to the police station. My heart pounded as I handed over the evidence. The emails, the video footage, and the bag of scrambled eggs I'd carefully stored in a sealed container. I explained everything. Helen's behavior, the symptoms I'd been experiencing, the poison plot I'd uncovered. Detective Morales, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s, listened intently. She asked sharp, pointed questions, but there was no trace of doubt in her tone. "You've done well, Julia," she said after reviewing the materials. "This is serious, and we're going to treat it that way. I'll have the food tested for toxins, and we'll issue a warrant to search the house. If what you're saying checks out, Helen and her accomplice won't get away with this." I felt a glimmer of hope. Later that day, I received a call from Detective Morales. "You were right," she said. "The food tested positive for traces of a controlled substance, one that, in high enough doses, could have been fatal. We're moving forward with the search warrant. Stay put and keep your phone close. We'll update you as soon as we know more." The relief was overwhelming, but it was short-lived. That evening, while I was still at Lila's, Helen called me. "Julia," she said, her voice unnervingly calm, "I hope you're having a good time with your friend. I just wanted to let you know that I've decided to make some changes around here. Don't worry about coming back tonight. I've taken care of everything." My blood ran cold. What did she mean by taken care of everything? I immediately called Detective Morales to report the call. "She's nervous," Morales said. "She knows something's wrong, but she doesn't know how much you've uncovered. Stay where you are. We'll handle it." The next day, Morales called with an update. "We executed the warrant this morning," she said. "We found correspondence with her accomplice, Paul, that corroborates your story, along with evidence of financial tampering in your father's estate. Helen and Paul are both in custody now." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So it's over?" "It's over," Morales confirmed. "And thanks to your quick thinking, you're safe." I hung up and sank into Lila's couch, the weight of weeks of fear finally lifting. Helen and Paul had tried to destroy me, but they underestimated my resolve. For the first time in what felt like forever, I felt free. The day after Helen and Paul's arrest, I sat in Lila's living room, scrolling through news articles that covered the story. Words like poison plot and inheritance scheme flashed on the screen, each one a chilling reminder of how close I'd come to losing everything: my health, my father's legacy, even my life. "Look at this," Lila said, holding up her phone. She had found a local news piece featuring a photo of Helen being escorted into the police station, her expression a mix of anger and defeat. "It's surreal," I admitted, setting my phone down. "I lived with her. I trusted her, even when the cracks started showing." "And she betrayed that trust in the worst way," Lila said, her voice firm. "But you fought back, Julia. You didn't let her win." I wanted to believe her, but part of me still felt the weight of everything I had lost. Not just my father, but also the illusion of family Helen had created. The woman my dad had loved and trusted had been a stranger all along. Later that afternoon, Detective Morales called with another update. "Julia, I thought you'd want to know," she said. "Paul has confessed. He admitted to orchestrating the entire scheme, from the poison to the forged financial documents. Helen's role was significant, but he was the one pulling the strings." "Does that mean she'll try to shift the blame onto him?" I asked. "It's possible," Morales said. "But with the evidence we've collected, they'll both face serious charges. You'll need to testify during the trial, but I don't see them walking away from this." I thanked her and hung up, feeling a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Over the next few weeks, I began rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. Returning to my dad's house felt like stepping into a battlefield, every corner filled with memories of Helen's manipulation. I hired a professional cleaning service to restore the space, removing anything that reminded me of her. The house started to feel like mine again, a place where I could breathe without fear. I also met with my lawyer to finalize the estate's legal matters. Helen and Paul had attempted to siphon funds from my father's accounts, but their paper trail was sloppy. Everything was being restored, and my lawyer assured me that my inheritance was secure. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself thinking less about Helen and Paul and more about what came next. For so long, my life had revolved around surviving their schemes. Now, I had the chance to focus on something new: my future. The day I testified against Helen and Paul, I walked into the courtroom with my head held high. It wasn't easy to face them again, Helen with her icy glare and Paul with his smug indifference, but I refused to let their presence shake me. The prosecutor guided me through my testimony, and I recounted everything: the emails, the footage, the poisoned food. With every word, I felt stronger, like I was reclaiming the power they had tried to steal from me. Helen avoided my gaze, but Paul smirked as I spoke, as though none of this mattered to him. Yet when the prosecutor laid out the evidence, even his confidence began to crumble. When it was over, I stepped out of the courtroom and into the crisp afternoon air. I felt light, as though the weight of their betrayal had finally lifted. Detective Morales approached me, a small smile on her face. "You did well, Julia. They'll be held accountable for what they did." I nodded, letting her words sink in. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about closure, about knowing I'd done everything I could to protect myself and honor my father's legacy. As I walked away from the courthouse, I knew I'd never let anyone take advantage of me again. A few weeks after the trial, I stood in my father's study, sunlight streaming through the windows. The room smelled faintly of old books and cedar, a comforting reminder of him. On the desk sat a framed photo of the two of us from my college graduation. I picked it up, running my fingers along the edge of the frame. "I did it, Dad," I whispered. "They're gone. They can't hurt us anymore." The house felt different now, lighter, safer. It wasn't just bricks and mortar anymore. It was mine. I felt at peace. I decided to honor my dad's memory by putting the house to good use. I reached out to local charities, offering to host small fundraisers and events in his name. He had always believed in giving back, and this felt like a way to keep his spirit alive. One evening, as I stood on the back porch watching the sunset, Lila joined me with 2 glasses of wine. "To new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To freedom," I replied, clinking mine against hers. As the sky faded into shades of orange and pink, I realized something profound. Helen and Paul had tried to break me, but in the process, they had only made me stronger. My future was mine to build, and I intended to make it count.